All right, it's 4:30, and we're going to get started with our first webinar in a long series of National History Day webinars sponsored by the New Mexico Humanities Council. National History Day in New Mexico is sponsored by the New Mexico Humanities Council and the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs. And these two organizations make it possible for anybody who wants to, public or private or charter schools in New Mexico, to participate in National History Day for free. And if you have information, I'm Ellen Dornan, I'm the National History Day coordinator for the state of New Mexico. And if you would like more information about the National History Day program, I encourage you to contact me directly at historyday@nmhum.org. Or to visit our website at nmhum.org/historyday. Before we get started, I'd like to just go over a few aspects of the Google Hangouts. And so if you are watching through Google+, I encourage you to use the question and answer bar. And I'd love it if anybody who's watching right now, go ahead and check in. Let me know who you are, what grades you teach, and what school you teach at. Or if you're a student, what grade you're participating in, at which school. If you're watching on YouTube, I'd appreciate it if you would use the YouTube comments section to check in the same way. Just let me know where you're teaching or where you're a student and what grades, what grade levels you're participating in National History Day. If you don't have a Google user account, you can't comment on the question and answer bar or the YouTube comments. Please go ahead and drop me an email at historyday@nmhum.org. and let me know. New teachers who participate in History Day training are eligible for stipends if you get students to the contest. So if you want to be eligible for that contest, I just need you to get in touch with me and let me know which trainings you've attended and where you are, so that when you come around to the contest, we can make sure that you get your stipend. And I'm going to go ahead and start our program here. And today we're going to be talking about the 2017 theme, and which this year is taking a stand in history. And on air. Just want to make sure I'm on air. We're going to start this here. So, the theme this year is taking a stand in history. And again, if you want more information about the theme or participating in National History Day, please visit nmhum.org, that's the New Mexico Humanities Council website, or NHD.org, which is the National History Day website. Just going to give this a minute here. All right. Going to give YouTube a minute to catch up with me. So the goals of our little Google Hangout today are several. So one is to really engage with the theme so that when you're teaching history, you can keep referring to that theme to focus your students' content reading, regardless of what kind of historical material you are covering. We're going to go over a few of the materials that we have available for your use in the classroom. And as I said, there are many materials available on the website. And so we're going to look at just a few of them that are particular to working with the theme. We're going to discuss some topics associated with the theme in a way that will help you address the theme in your classrooms. And we're going to look a little bit about how the theme is a springboard for your students' analysis of the impact of their topic in history. So the process of developing a National History Day project starts with the theme, and the theme should be the skeleton of everything your students do. After the students have engaged with the theme, then they'll choose a topic and a category. And the categories, in case you're not familiar with the National History Day process, include individual or group work, websites, documentaries, papers, performances, or exhibits. You know what? I'm just going to try this again because I'm feeling like this is not broadcasting the way that I'm hoping it will broadcast. And so, give me a minute. This one is certainly the guinea pig. All right. I'm going to try this again. Here we go. Do that. And we're going to do that. We'll see if it comes up properly. So here we go. In addition to the individual or group, students can choose to do a website, documentary, performance, or exhibit. Students can also do a paper, but only as individuals. After the students have their topic and know what kind of History Day project they're going to be developing, they'll start by doing some secondary research that will give them an overview of the topic and an overview of where they want to go with the project. Then they're going to move into some primary research, some primary source research that will support the specific arguments they're making that tie the topic in with the theme. And I'm just going to interrupt it really quickly here. I noticed that we have some people joining in. And I do want to say, if you can go ahead and make comments on the YouTube channel or through the question and answer bar if you're watching through Google+, and just let me know what school you're at, what grades you're working at, whether you're a teacher or a student. Also, let me know if you're having any technical difficulties watching or hearing. So once the student's done the secondary research to get the overview, the primary research that supports the specific arguments that they're making, tying that topic into the theme, then they can go ahead and develop that project. So throughout this semester, throughout this contest season, we'll be doing webinars on each one of these little parts But today we're going to start again with the bones, exploring the theme, taking a stand in history. All right. So, I feel like I'm having technical difficulties, so we're going to try this one more time. Maybe we just have to do it like that. I don't know. We'll see. Okay. Yeah, that works a little bit better. Okay. Nope. I think it's doing that. So we're just going to do it like this. All right. So, why use a theme at all? Why is History Day a theme-based contest? The theme gives a central focus to the work of all the students. It becomes a common yardstick for the study of history. So when the judges go to judge the different projects, they're not judging apples and oranges. They're judging everybody with the same criteria and using the same theme. The theme provides a focus for content reading, no matter what the material is, and it supports students in making connections across time, which is critical in the study of history. So, for example, what's the connection between Frederick Douglass, the Emancipation Proclamation, and women's suffrage? Using a theme like taking a stand in history, students can explore the many decades of work on the abolitionist movement, of work that people contributed to the women's suffrage movement. They can explore the impact of Frederick Douglass's writing with emancipation. They can explore the impact of Frederick Douglass's actions with women's suffrage. And so looking at the theme of taking a stand, students can narrow in on what particular stand they're interested in, and then explore those connections over time. What came first? Why did somebody have to take a stand? What was the impact of taking a stand? So what does taking a stand mean? First and foremost, it means taking a firm position on an issue. Secondly, it's taking a stand in support of an issue. So, for example, protesters in Tiananmen Square were taking a firm position in support of democracy. Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. were taking a firm position in support of civil rights and equality. And this will be important for your students as they develop projects, because it's also easy to state this in an opposite way. Rosa Parks was taking a stand against Jim Crow or against segregation. But it's much more positive to look at what they were trying to accomplish. And that also gives students a hook for measuring the impact of change. For example, the Tiananmen Square protesters took a stand in support of democracy, but have yet to make a huge impact in changing their government in support of that issue. Whereas Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King's work certainly led to a lot of change. Now, individuals like Martin Luther King Jr. can certainly take a stand, but groups of people can also take a stand. So, for example, rebel barons in England in 1215 took a stand and forced King John to sign the Magna Carta, which became the backbone of English law. Women in the 1800s took a stand against rampant drunkenness and domestic violence, which led to the temperance movement and ultimately to a constitutional amendment in 1820. So if a group of people have common interests, they can take a stand as well. It doesn't, History Day Project does not have to focus on a single heroic individual. It can be a movement, it can be a self-identified group, as well as a single person. So people who take a stand usually face opposition from somebody who you could say is taking a stand on the other end. Often we tell the stories of people who take a stand and overcome opposition. Here's an example from New Mexico history. Senator Holm Bursam, who wanted to legitimize the land claims of non-native squatters on Pueblo lands. So the people, among the people who took a stand to oppose the Bursam bill were a number of Pueblo governors who traveled to DC to express their opposition to Holm Bursam's bill and to legislation that would dispossess them of their lands. They overcame the opposition of the pro-Anglo settler faction in the US Senate and were able to retain full title and possession of their traditional tribal lands. Often we think of people taking a stand by taking action, and we have Teddy Roosevelt here right before the Battle of San Juan Hill, where he and the Rough Riders took a fabulous stand in the Spanish-American War to achieve the heights of San Juan Hill in a bloody battle. But other people like Cesar Chavez, the United Farm Workers, took a stand by refusing to do things. They led a boycott starting in August 1970 that eventually led to the passage of the California Agricultural Labor Relations Act 5 years later. So they were taking a stand in support of more rights for agricultural laborers by refusing to do something and by encouraging others to refuse to do something. And so encourage your students to think outside the box. It's easy to think of taking a stand as military victory or some decisive, exciting battle, but it doesn't have to be doing something or running out and taking action, running up San Juan Hill. It can be refusing to do something, dropping out. Another positive thing about taking a stand, or about a theme-based approach to National History Day, is that a theme can fit all interests. And on our website, nmhum.org, you'll find the Taking a Stand in History theme book, which you can download as a PDF. You're also welcome to contact me for if you would like a print copy of the theme book or print copies to hand out to your students. The theme book does have a number of topics from world history and US history, which you can explore with your students in those classes. I've gone ahead and added a number of themes from New Mexico history. And so if you look here, you have an example, a couple examples of people taking a stand, of groups of people taking a stand. So you have the Pueblo Revolt taking a stand against Spanish colonization. You have the penitentes who took a stand to preserve traditional ways in villages affected by secularization of the missions. You have individuals taking a stand in favor of more education or like Padre Martinez. You also have a fabulous example of somebody who took a stand by refusing to take a stand, Governor Manuel Armijo, who refused to fight the Army of the West as they invaded New Mexico and unconditionally surrendered to the Army of the West, turning New Mexico over into American hands. So no matter what aspect of history you're looking at, it's very easy to find great examples. And again, you can find the New Mexico theme sheet also on our website at nmhum.org/historyday. No matter what your students' interests are, they will be able to find topics of people taking a stand in different subject areas. So, for instance, in sports history, there are tons of examples of people taking a stand in favor of civil rights or religious freedom or establishing equality among athletes. In women's history, your students can look at groups of women, like the suffragettes, taking a stand. They can look at people who tried to take a stand and failed, like with the Equal Rights Amendments. Or they can look at courageous individuals who took a stand, like Cleopatra in the Roman Empire. Likewise with Native American history or Jewish history or Spanish colonial history or nearly any interest, art history that your students might have. And in the theme book this year, there is a great example of art history, of taking a stand in art history, going back to the French Impressionists who took a stand against what they considered stultifying conformity of the French salons, and that was their issue. And they took a stand in favor of more self-expression and creating a different style of art, which we now call Impressionism. And that's a fun little way to explore in the theme book. So I know we have a few viewers now, and again, I'm going to suggest that if you can, please go ahead and comment on the YouTube page, or use the question and answer button if you're watching on Google+, and go ahead and let me know what issue, cause, or movement you would do a topic about if you were going to be taking a stand. If you're not logged in with a Google account and you can't comment on YouTube or use the question and answer button on the Hangouts, then please go ahead and email me at historyday at nmhum.org, and I'll give you a few minutes. So here's the question that we're looking at is, think of an issue, cause, or movement, and think about why it was important at the time. Why was the issue an issue? Why did people need to address this issue? Who was it who mobilized to support the cause? Was it an individual? Was it a group? So are you thinking about civil rights? Are you thinking about the Boxer Rebellion in China? Are you thinking about abolitionism? So why was it important? How did it become an issue? What were the factors leading up to it? And who was it who took a stand on this issue? Who was it who mobilized to support the cause? So go ahead and make your comments on YouTube if you can. Send me a question and answer through the Hangout if you can, or drop me an email at History Day at nmhum.org what topic you would be interested in if you were doing a History Day project. Right? Okay, so we have one comment here that is the Pueblo Revolt. So that's a great one. It's a great topic from New Mexico history. I would say the issue, cause, or movement was, let's just, for the sake of argument, say it was religious freedom and forced labor, the impact of Spanish colonization. Why was it important at the time? I think you would want to encourage your students to get into the specific actions leading up to the revolt, such as capture of Pueblo leaders for on charges of witchcraft. Who mobilized to support the cause? So that's an interesting question. Which Pueblos participated in the revolt, and which Pueblos were excluded from the revolt? The Apache and the Navajo were not necessarily included in the planning for the Pueblo revolt. So that's a great topic. Thank you. Let's see. Okay. We have one here for women's rights. So that's a pretty broad topic, women's rights. Delving in more deeply, you could look at, I know I've been bringing up the topic of suffrage, but why did suffrage become important? Who were the leaders, the suffrage movement, and what did it take for that movement to gain enough traction to become a constitutional amendment? Those are all very interesting questions around the theme that your students could engage with as they start to pick a topic for National History Day. And I do want to say, you don't want your students doing a very broad topic. You do want them to move in and focus as much as possible. But once your students have a general idea of what sort of topic or what sort of issue or cause, then they need to start thinking about that time and place in history. So again, if you're looking at the Pueblo Revolt, you want to say, well, what was happening leading up to this? Why were Pueblo leaders being prosecuted? Why were they being accused of witchcraft? Why were they being threatened with execution? Why did which actions or which priests were going in and conducting raids in the kivas to destroy sacred ceremonial objects? How was the encomienda system directly impacting the Pueblos' ability to feed themselves? How were climatic changes like the droughts the Pueblos' resentment of the labor that they had to do for the priests? And what you really want your students to answer is, so what? Why is this important? Of course, the analysis is important for any student. Synthesizing the material that they're reading and being able to analyze it and draw conclusions is a critical part of the Common Core standards. But particularly for History Day, when they do participate in a contest, then 60% of their score is related to their ability to demonstrate impact of this topic in history. So it becomes very important as you're starting out looking at the theme to be able to establish that time and place in history and help your students really start grappling with the so what, who cares. Again, on the website, we have a number of graphic organizers available for your students in establishing historical context. So, example of a graphic organizer, maybe sort of hard to see. So I'll just go around here. So for instance, we have one of the things that kids just love talking about in New Mexico is the space race and space exploration programs. So if you're talking about the Neil Armstrong, the first moonshot, who are your key people? Well, you've got John Kennedy, you've got Neil Armstrong, you've got and you've got political leaders. What was the cultural climate? What was the political climate? And so you have a cultural climate and a political climate where we're engaged in Cold War with the Soviet Union, and the U.S. is in a period of relative prosperity and peace despite the Cold War, but that so we have the economic resources to sink into space race or space exploration, but we're also being seriously driven by fear of the Soviets' advancements. So that we have a lot of popular support for investing in space exploration. Main events that occurred, well, certainly you're going to want to talk about Sputnik in there. Science and technology of the time period. So where were we technologically? Where were the Soviets technologically? What did we have to do in order to get a man on the moon? Were there failures on the way? How did we achieve success in a stand to make the United States the foremost space explorers of planet Earth? With this graphic organizer, students can also look at alternate perspectives. So they may want to switch all that around and really say, really look at the Soviet perspective and look at the Sputnik launch, or look at what the Soviets did to take a stand in response to our putting the first man on the moon. The alternate perspectives may also include looking at the series of failures that occurred before there were any kind of successes. So this graphic organizer, and again, a number of other graphic organizers, are available as downloads from the website. The other thing about taking the stand is that, as I said, it does help students make connections over time. So if you look at the life of Frederick Douglass, and you look at the Emancipation Proclamation, well, certainly there is a connection over time. Using that theme to take a stand and honing in on the single topic of emancipation or of recognition of the horrors of slavery or of abolitionism allows students to make a coherent argument that the life of Frederick Douglass and the work of Frederick Douglass leads directly to the Emancipation Proclamation and the freeing of the slaves. Students should consider that taking a stand does not always result in immediate change. And indeed, at many points of history, it doesn't even result in change during that person's lifetime. And so if a student is looking at, for instance, some of the social movements, the early advocates of that issue, the first people who took a stand, may not have lived to see any change happen. Taking a stand does not even necessarily mean resulting in change, and students can consider that as well, that not only may there not be change during an individual's lifetime, that change may come over a generation, it may come in an era, it may not come at all. So whatever argument your students make about taking a stand and tying that stand into whatever topic they choose, they're going to need primary source materials to support their arguments. And going back to the National History Day timeline, the student will start out doing research with secondary sources. And yes, it's okay to start with Wikipedia as long as you don't end there. But start out with those secondary sources, start out with those broad overviews to narrow in the topic, to figure out how you're going to tie in the theme, to figure out how you're going to make the argument that this person or this group taking a stand led to this change happening or that impact. And the student's going to need to make those arguments with primary source materials. So the primary source materials might be photographs of mescaleros living in their homeland so that students can imagine or try to understand how the Mescalero Apache lifestyle led them to resist being placed on a reservation far away from their homelands. The primary sources may be letters going back and forth between Kit Carson and General Carleton discussing whether or not, at first Carleton's letters are issuing orders to Carson to start initiating the removal of the Navajo from Dinétah. And so students can look at Kit Carson making a stand against Carleton and resigning his commission and then turning back around to accept the commission, acknowledging that he would probably do it more humanely than others. So those primary sources become essential for students to be able to make those arguments and to tie those threads together over time. They want to be able to prove this happened, so there was an issue that caused someone or some people to take a stand, and the stand had this sort of impact, and then they need to back up every part of that with their primary source materials. Primary sources could be images created in that time period. They could be photographs, sketches, maps, architectural drawings, all from that time period, the time period in question in inquiry. under inquiry. They could be written materials such as diaries or journals, correspondence. It could be ephemera like brochures or newsletters. It could be unpublished materials like manuscripts. Primary sources could be artifacts from that period. So looking at materials that people were using, placards or sashes that the suffragettes wore, where they had their issues printed on them. The two primary sources that are primary sources, but where students need to tread carefully, are number one, newspaper and magazine articles, and number two, oral history interviews. So a newspaper or magazine article is only a primary source if it's printed, if it's written and printed during the time period under inquiry. And with interviews, it is only a primary source if the person the student is interviewing has direct knowledge of where they actually experience the event in question. So for example, if your student goes and interviews an Egyptologist about the life of Cleopatra, that is not a primary source. But if your student goes and interviews Rodolfo Gonzalez or Alicia Escalante about Reyes Tijerina and the Tierra Amarilla courthouse raid, that would be a primary source. And that is what the judges will be looking for at the contest. So again, the purpose of using these primary sources are making connections over time. Another topic in New Mexico history of me taking a stand is the battle to keep Spanish as an official language under the New Mexico state constitution. And so students can look at a number of documents, starting with the congressional report that supported New Mexico being admitted as a state, but only if English was made the sole official language. Students can look at interim documents, such as the Compromise on Public Education, that allows some schools to provide bilingual education or even Spanish language education. Congress can look at the, students can look at the congressional arguments of Albert J. Beveridge, who was a senator who firmly opposed the admission of New Mexico because of its Spanish-speaking residents, and making the argument that New Mexicans who spoke Spanish wouldn't be able to participate in their civic structure because of their lack of English language skills. Students can look at the congressional documents offering admission to New Mexico as part of Arizona, and the rejection of that offer by the Arizonans who did not want Spanish-speaking people, or they did not want to have to comply with Spanish language requirements in courts and schools. And finally, students can look at the Constitution of the state of New Mexico and see how those Spanish language provisions ended up intact. So those primary source documents can enable the student to support every point of their argument, no matter who they identify as taking a stand, no matter what the issue is that they identify the stand being taken on, and no matter what conclusions they are trying to draw, they need to be supporting that all throughout with those primary source documents. The other thing that helps with the primary source documents is that it helps bring history alive, in that students can really reflect on how the primary source material reflects the period in which they were created that may be very different from what we understand now. What we consider normal now is not how people view things in the past. So, for example, in the past, it was normal to require certain races to use different entrances to a public building, or pay different admission, or for certain groups to be barred from access, or to have to use different entrances to a building. Very different from what we understand now. And again, in the theme book, which you can download from our website, or which you can contact me and I'll mail you a copy. In the theme book, there are a lot of activities for analyzing primary sources. So the first step of analyzing a primary source is going to be, your students will just observe it. What do they notice? How is it created? What sort of things don't make sense to your students? What's a small thing that might be interesting? So looking at this payment voucher from the Continental Army, the interesting mix of print and handwriting, the kind of style of handwriting, the border for the Continental Army, the printed border around the edge. It's fascinating. So these are the sort of things that your students can just observe about the primary source. After they've had some time to observe and just examine the document, then you can encourage them to reflect on that primary source. So they can consider who made it, why was it made, who was it made for, how did they make it, why is this item important, what would be different if it were made today, and above all, what can be learned from examining this document. Finally, your students can come up with their own questions related to the primary source document, which are, what does this document make you wonder about? Who does it make you wonder about? What, when did these things happen? Where, why, how? So for instance, this particular document is an IOU for a Mr. Juba Freeman. Well, who was Juba Freeman? Your students may speculate about his status in the Continental Army. They may rightfully speculate that he was a free man, meaning that he was not a slave who had been free, but he was an African American who was born free. So why was he serving in the Army? How long did he serve in the Army? What regiment did he serve in? What did he do? What entitled him to these 11 pounds and 4 shillings that he was paid by the Continental Army? So primary sources are a great way for your students to get into addressing the issues of the theme and to supporting arguments tying the theme to their topic. We will have a couple webinars later this fall. Let's see, so we're going to have a one in October on using New Mexico archives for those students of yours who will be developing topics in New Mexico history. And then in December 6th, we'll have another one just focusing on using primary sources, because by then your students should be doing their primary source research and really getting into the analysis of how these primary sources are supporting their argument. Now, again, I think we still have some watchers, so I'd like to hear from you all. When you go back and look at this stand, or this is something that you can just reflect on yourselves, so we had a couple of examples of women's rights and the Pueblo Revolt. Looking at those, how did the stand that those people took, let's say the suffragettes or the Pueblo leaders in 1680, how did the stand they took affect the society that they were in, economically, socially, or politically? Was it successful? Did it lead to other changes? And where can the influence be seen today? And if you want to share your ideas through the YouTube comments or through the question and answer bar of the Hangouts, I'd be happy to hear what you all have to say about it. I know certainly with both those topics, it's easy to come up with examples. Yes, I would say both those stands were successful. And so it's easy to come up with examples of how things are different now because of the actions of those groups of people who took a stand on those issues. And what you're going to want your students to do when you're leading them through these exercises is really make sure that they are supporting those arguments. So if for instance, they say, well, because of the work of the suffragettes, we have Hillary Clinton as a major party nominee for president. So if they're going to make that argument in terms of impact, they're going to need to support it every step of the way. They are going to need to find the primary source material that will allow them to support their argument about the theme as it relates to their topic. So if they want to demonstrate the impact in history, then they're going to need to make all those connections over time from the work of Susan B. Anthony and Alice Paul and Emmeline Pankhurst to the nomination of Hillary Clinton. I'm just checking. I'm not seeing any more questions coming in, so I'm guessing you're okay with what I'm saying. I'm not trying to shut you down, but if you want to, you know what, here we go, here, Raise Tierra Amarilla. So that is such an interesting case, and absolutely, that's just a fabulous topic. And when you go to those questions, and I would say also there are really terrific primary source materials available online through the UNM libraries for exploring the Tierra Amarilla courthouse raid. And so I think you'd want your students to really look at the impact of what Raise Tierra did. Was it successful? Was he able to, was the impact a matter of raising consciousness? Was the impact a matter of instilling pride in land grant settlers? Was the impact to make legislators more conscious of the rights of land grant settlers? I think all those questions are very interesting, and those are the sorts of things that you're going to want your students exploring if that's a topic that they choose. So when you get into the theme in your classroom, you can apply the theme in almost anything that you're teaching. So once you get your students understanding what the theme means, then whatever it is you're teaching, say, who's taking a stand here? What's the issue? Why do people have to take a stand? Who's mobilizing it? What is the impact? And so you can help your students understand that no matter what topic that they're looking at, they can be tying that into their History Day project. And then as your students get closer to choosing a topic, which should be about 2 to 4 weeks into working on a History Day project, that you want to start getting them to narrow it down, they can start working from that very broad topic of women's rights or the Pueblo Revolt to looking at something much more specific. And the narrowing down process may be shaped in part by teacher requirements, by what we're teaching in that class, in part by student interest, by the fact that there is a limited time to do these projects. And so you're going to want your students to take as small of a bite as possible. So instead of looking at all of women's rights, they're looking at the impact that one person, you know, Emmeline Pankhurst or Alice Paul had. Instead of looking at all of land grant issues in New Mexico, they're just looking at the impact of the Tierra Amarilla courthouse raid. So what that may look like is you have a student who's interested in women's history, but you're teaching New Mexico history. So your student may choose Georgia O'Keeffe, and then they still need to narrow it down just a little bit farther. So they're looking at artistic independence, or they're looking at taking a stand against classical art and emerging as a modernist. So you want to help them narrow that topic down as much as possible. And the theme can certainly help follow the path from what they're interested in and what they have to do to something that is a very achievable History Day project. And we will get into choosing categories and topics in mid-September. We'll have a webinar on that. But when your students are choosing a topic, there are a few things they have to consider. Number one, impact. Yes, they have to show the impact. So if they choose a topic where there really wasn't that much of an impact, they're going to be flailing and explaining that to the judges. It needs to be long enough ago that they can demonstrate that impact. A rule of thumb is about 20 years. It needs to be able to fit the theme, and local history topics are always great. So we have the people of Acoma and the Spanish colonists here. We have the Taos artists. We have Reyes Tiarina, just like you all suggested. And I'm just going to go over quickly a couple of activities that you can do. So if you want to get your students into defining the theme first, you can download the theme sheet, again, from our website, and then have the students work individually to look up definitions and explore the meaning of the theme, work through the theme sheet and mark it up, come together into a small group and create a collaborative definition for each word. And then the small groups can come together as a whole in the class to share the definitions and to pick some sample topics and discuss how they fit the theme. When you're applying the theme, again, in a small group, the students can talk about the who and the what was the issue, what was the opposition, who was the opposition, why were they opposed to it, what was the change, and then again, come together as a whole group to discuss the question individually and to really discuss some of the multiple perspectives involved. So would students be willing to discuss the Pueblo Revolt from the Spanish point of view, as well as from the Pueblo point of view? Did the Spanish take a stand? What was the stand? Why did they want to take it? What was the issue they were supporting? And so students can start to understand the nuances of these issues. Another activity is that you all can look at iconic individuals like Martin Luther King Jr. or Susan B. Anthony and take some primary source materials associated with their lives and then look at all the multiple perspectives associated with that primary source material. Who was impacted by Rosa Parks sitting down on the bus? Who was who might have read Martin Luther King's letters and had opinions on it. And so again, your students can work in small groups to start to explore these multiple perspectives that they interpret and go through that process of observe, reflect, and question the primary source documents. And then move to a whole group so that everybody can share their different perspectives. So again, if you want to order the theme books, please contact me at historyday@nmhum.org, and I will send you the printed theme books. You can also go ahead and download them from the website. We'll have a lot more webinars coming up, and thanks for being patient with some of the technical difficulties that we've had. This schedule, again, is on the website at nmhum.org/historyday, and there are tons of resources available there. Also, feel free to contact some of the regional coordinators. Erin Gokul is helping out in the north, David Lozano is helping out in the south, and I am helping students in central and eastern New Mexico with your History Day projects. So thank you so much to everybody who tuned in today. I appreciate your comments and your feedback, and I really appreciate your participation in History Day. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for all you do in your